Hello everyone. In the last video, we discussed everything about implicit binding. Implicit binding means whenever we invoke a function during the creation of the execution context, the JavaScript engine determines the value of this. Now, is there any way we can control the value of this explicitly? Yes, we can. And that is known as explicit binding. Explicit binding is achieved using call, apply, or bind method. These are not standalone functions. These are methods of the function object. We know that every function in JavaScript is an object. So all JavaScript functions have these three methods. Now let's check an example. So here we have a simple object user and having two properties name and greet method. So inside the greet method, we are trying to access the name field of this object. Now, if you try to call user.greet like this, we know that the greet method is invoked using the object user. So the value of this inside greet will be this user object. So it will print Arun. So let's save this. Hey, Arun is printed. Now, let me comment this and we can extract greet from this user object. Now, what happens if we do greet like this? Now, this function call is not associated with any object, which means inside this greet function, the value of this will be undefined and it will throw an error. So let's save this. You can see that cannot read properties of undefined, reading name. So we covered all these in the previous video. Now, using the call method, we can explicitly set the value of this. So now greet is a function. So the function must have a property call. So call is a method. Now here, as a first argument, we can pass an object, and that object will be the value of this inside the greet method. So here, if you just pass user, so user is this object. Now this is essentially saying that call the function greet and use this user object as the value of this inside greet. That's what it says. Now let's save this. And now, hey Arun is working. So what is happening here? So using the call method, we just passed an object as the first argument to the call method. Now internally, this call method invokes the greet function, and when it invokes, the passed object will be the value of this inside the function. So you have to understand that we are not calling the greet function directly. We are calling the call method of the greet function and passing an object. Okay, so let's do another example. Greet dot call, and this time I'm passing a different object, Shweta. Now save this. So hey Arun, now hey Shweta. In both cases, we are using this greet function, but we are passing different object as the value of this. Okay, so this is how the call method works. Now, let me remove all this. What happens if you do this? So here we are directly accessing the greet method using the user object and then using the call method available to the greet function. So here also there shouldn't be any confusion because we are not invoking greet method directly. Okay, so if you just use user.greet like this, yes, here we are invoking the greet method and using the user object. So obviously the value of this inside this method will be user. Now Here, we are not invoking the greet method. Instead, we are invoking the call method, which is available to the greet function. So obviously, the value of this will be this object where name is Shweta. So let's save this. You can see that, hey, Shweta. Now let's create another function. So here is a simple function, print user, which receives two arguments and which prints the name from this object and then the past age and the past place. Okay, and you can see that this is a standalone function. So what happens if you just call print user and just pass India and 21? Okay, place and age, what happens? So if you just do like this, the value of this inside this function will be undefined. So there will be an error thrown from this line, right? Cannot read property of undefined. Now we can use the call method here. Okay, now here the first argument of the call method should be the value of this, and we can just pass user in this case, user. Now earlier the greet method wasn't receiving any arguments. Now in the case of print user, it is expecting two arguments. So when we use the call method, the first argument should be the value of this that we wanted, and the rest of the arguments should be the arguments of the original function. So in this case, print user expects two arguments, so we are passing those two arguments here. So save this. You can see that name Arun, age 21, place India. So this is all about the call method. Now let's talk about the apply method. Okay, the apply method also does the same thing. The only difference between call and apply method is the way they are invoked. Okay, so in the case of call method, the first argument should be the value of this, and we pass the rest of the arguments of the function comma separated. Now when it comes to apply, there is only two arguments. So the first argument will be the value of this, and the second argument is an array, and the array contains all the arguments that the function is expecting. So in this case, if you are using the apply method, it will be print user dot apply. Now the first argument should be the value of this, and we can just pass user here. And the second argument should be an array, and the array should contain all the arguments in the order. Okay, so here we can just pass India, and as age we can pass 21. Let me comment this. So again, name Arun, age 21, place India. Everything just works. So this is the only difference between call and apply. So you might get an obvious doubt that why we need both of these functions. So it's just a small difference, right? So before ES6, these two methods have their own needs. So let's consider a scenario. So let me create another function here. Function compute sum, okay, and which receives n number of arguments. And we just print this dot name and returns args dot reduce. So compute sum is a simple function which receives n number of arguments, and this should be integers, and it will return the sum of everything, and just prints the name field of this object. Okay, now consider a scenario like we already have a list of arguments as part of the function logic. Let's say like something like this: const amounts 100, 200, 1000, 14, 600. So like this. So as part of the logic, any logic, we have the list of values like this. Now, if you have to use, let's consider that we don't have any apply method. We only have the call method. So how will we do? So we are calling the compute sum dot call, and as the first argument, we have to pass the value of this, and we can just pass user here. Now, the rest of the argument should be comma separated. Now, we have the arguments in an array, okay, and consider that we don't have apply. Then what we have to do? We have to do like this: amounts of 0, then amounts of 1, and continue like this. What happens is have a 100 elements. So that's one issue, right? So in this particular scenario, what we can simply do is, instead of call, we can just do apply, and we can simply pass the list as it is, amounts. Okay, now in ES6, when it comes to ES6, we have this spread and rest operator. Okay, so using the spread operator, we can simply use the call method like this: compute sum dot call. Now, as the value of this, we can pass user, and amounts is an array, so we need it to be comma separated. So we can simply do amounts like this. So in ES6, since we have these operators, we can simply use this. We don't really need the apply method, but before that, we needed these two. Okay, so that's why we have two methods that actually does the same thing. Now let's understand the bind method, the final method. So let me remove this. So bind method is similar to call and apply. The difference is that call and apply immediately invokes the function, right? But when it comes to bind method, it won't invoke the function. Instead, it returns a new function. So in the returned function, the value of this will be the object that we passed when we invoked a bind method. So for example, here we have print user. So print user dot bind, and we can just pass user. So user will be the value of this. Now let me comment this, and there is no other function call. So just print user dot bind, and I just passed user and save this. You can see that there is nothing in the console because just calling bind won't invoke the function, right? But it returns a new function so that we can just save it into another variable. Now print user dot bind returns a new function, and in this returned function, the value of this will be user, which means if you just call fn like this and save this, now fn is actually print user, right? So if you just save this, it will, yeah, name is Arun and age is undefined and place is undefined. Now you can see that name is Arun. Why? Because we passed user as the value of this. So here the print user will be invoked where this will be user. So user dot name will give you Arun. Now you can see that when we invoked fn, we didn't pass place and age. So that is why we are getting undefined in this case. So if you just pass, let's say, um, India and uh, 30 like this. So Arun, age 30, place India. So this is the bind function. Okay. So there's one more thing. This function expects two arguments. Now here, when we invoked bind method, we passed only the first argument. So the first argument should be the value of this. Now what happens if you pass the second argument, only the second argument, and I'm passing India here. Now let me call fn without passing any argument. Okay, so in this case, you can see that name is Arun, age is undefined, but place is India. Okay, so what happens here is that the returned function always have the value of this as user and the value of place as undefined. So these two values are already bound to this function. Now the returned function is expecting only one argument, which is the second argument. Okay, so here, if you just simply pass 26 or something, you can see that Arun 26 India. Now what happens if you just pass age from here 19 like that? So now to the return function, the value of this will be the past object, and the value of place will be India, and the value of age will be 19 always. Now this function does not expect an argument. So this 26 is not used at all. So you can see that age is 19 here. Now there are some interesting cases to explore. So let me remove this and let me remove these two. Now fn is a function where the value of this will be user, but we have to pass these two arguments, place and age. Now let's create another object, const Shweta. Name is Shweta. Okay. Now what we can do, we can add a method which is print user, and its value is fn. Okay. Now fn is a bound function, and we bound it using the user object, right? And here Shweta is a new object which have a name Shweta and a new field print user, and its value is this function. Now what happens if you do Shweta dot print user, and we have to pass the age and place. So here India and 23. If you save this and if you see, we still get the name as Arun, age 23 and place India. So these two values just be passed, but the name is not Shweta. The name is still Arun, which is the user object. So this is one important thing that we have to understand. If this is a bound function, which means we use the print user function and bind it using the user object. Now, no matter what, if you add it anywhere as a property of object or anywhere, whenever this function is invoked, whether using an object or whether standalone, the value of this will always be user. Okay. Even though this is a property access, and here print user is invoked using the object Veda, inside this function, the value of this will always be user because this is a bound function. Okay, now another interesting case. Now print user is a function or is a method. Now we can use the call method. Now here we can explicitly pass the object Shweta, right? Now we can just pass place and age 25. Okay, so call method is used to explicitly set the value of this. Now inside this fn, the value of this will be user. Now here we are saying that call print user, but use the value of this as Sweda inside the print user function. But again, if you save this, we still get Arun, because even though we are using call here, we are using it on a bound function. We already bound the value of this using the user object. So we cannot change the value of this from a bound function using call, apply, or even bind. So for example, so we have this print user from Shweta. So let's do one thing. Const fn2 and print Shweta dot print user dot bind. Now here I'm passing Shweta. It's saying that return a new function, and the function should use Shweta as the value of this. So we are saving this into fn2. Now I'm calling fn2 using India and 25. Now let me comment this. Save it. We still get Arun. Okay. So one thing you need to understand about the bind function is once we set the value of this using the bind function, we cannot change it. We cannot change it using the call method or apply method or even the bind method. The value of this won't change. Now to understand why, we have to go a bit deeper. Okay, so we have to understand how the call, apply, and the bind method works internally. So let's just think about it, or let's just try to create our own version of the call and the bind method. Okay, so let me remove all these. Okay, now we have this print user, right? Now think about it. So when we so print user is a function, and user and India, let's say 31. Now what says this statement? This statement says is that invoke the function print user and use the user object as the value of this, right? Now think about it. Let's say we don't have the call method. Okay, you can see that we have the user object and we have a standalone print user function. So the user object have name and greet field. Consider that we don't have the call method. Okay, so this is not available. But what we want to achieve is that when we call print user, the value of this should be the user object. So without call method or apply method or bind method, what is the only option we have? We have to create a new field inside the user object, and the value should be this print user, and we have to invoke that field using the user object. Then the value of this will be the user object. What I'm saying is that if you don't have the call method, we simply do user dot, let's say, print user. Okay, now currently the user does not have a print user field, but I'm just adding a print user field, and as the value I'm just giving print user. Okay, now what happens, we can just call user dot print user, and here we can just pass the value of place and the value of age. So we get Arun, age 25, and place India. So without using the call, we can achieve that. Okay, so this is what actually happens inside the call method. Okay, so when we pass an object as the value of this, internally, before executing this function, it adds this function as a property to this object, and it invoke that function using the passed this object, so that the value of this will be this object. Okay, what exactly we did here is actually happening inside call. So let's try to recreate the call method. Let's create our own version of the call method. We have this print user, and print user have this call, bind, and apply. So let's create print user dot my call. So I'm giving a different name. So since functions are object, we can add properties to it. So I'm adding a new property, my call, which is another version of the call method. So which is a function. Now, so the call function expects the first argument should be the value of this. So I'm just giving this object, this obj. Now the rest of the argument depends on the function. Okay, so in this case, let's use the rest operator. So args. So um, so this is the function. So this is the object, this object, and I'm using the rest of the rest operator to get the rest of the arguments in the args array. Now, what is the first step? We have to add print user as a method to this object, right? Now see, if you call print user dot my call, okay, later, inside my call, if I'm using this, what will be the value of this if I'm calling my call using print user? So if I do this, the value of this inside my call will be print user, because I am invoking my call using the print user object. Okay, so Here, this will be print user, right? Now let's do as a first step. So let's create a key. Okay, so this obj dot key. So it can be any key. So this obj dot key is this. So this here is the print user. Now what we can simply do, return this obj dot key. Okay, now here this is set. Now we have to pass the rest of the arguments. So we have the rest of the arguments in this args array. So we can just simply spread it args like this. Okay, now let's try to use the myCall function here. So print user. So you see, I'm not using the original call method. We are using the new myCall. So dot myCall. Okay. Now we can simply pass user, or let's pass Shweta this time. Shweta, and we have to pass the arguments, right? Let's pass India and 24. Now save this. You can see that Shweta is printed, age is 24, and place is India. Okay, so it is working. So this is what actually happens inside the call method. But this is not complete because, so you see that we actually mutated the past to this object. We added a key field, right? And there is a value too, which means if you just log Shweta, so Shweta originally had a name and a print user function, right? So let me remove this print user. Okay, let's consider that Shweta only have name. Okay, now we passed this Shweta here. Now let's console.log Shweta. Shweta. Okay, now save this. So we get Shweta age 24 and place India, but the Shweta object have a new field key, which is the print user function, which means we just mutated the past object. With the original call, that won't happen. For example, so instead of my call, if you just use call, okay, and save this, now we get Shweta age 24 place India. Now the object Shweta object is not muted, it only have name. So for that, what we can simply do, instead of returning it directly, let's save this into a variable. So const result, right? Now we have the result in the result variable. Now what we can simply do is that delete this obj.key. Now we can return result. Okay. So this way we here added a field, okay, and its value is the original function, and then we called the function using the pass to this object. So inside the function, the value of this will be this object, and then we removed the key from the object, so the object remains same. Now instead of call, let's do my call. Now again we get Shweta age 24 and India. Now the object have name. Again there is another problem, which means let's say the original Shweta object already had a key like this. So key is a field and its value is 1, 2, 3, 4 in string. Now what we are doing here actually our intention is to add a new field and give this function as its value, then call it using this object, then delete it. Now since the original object already have a key field, here we are mutating it with an object and we are removing it. So essentially if you use my call, this key is removed from the original object. For example, save this, you can see that this object does not have a key. Now if you use, instead of my call, if you just use call, you see key is already there. So that's the other issue. So to resolve this, we need to find a unique string or unique key. Okay, we cannot just give a random value random key like this. Okay, so for that we can use symbol. So let's create a symbol variable, const key symbol. Now this is a unique um, value. Now we can use the value of this key variable as the key or as the field name for the this object. So here we have to do like this. Key is this, and when we invoke, it should be like this, and when we delete, it should be like this. Okay, now save this. So change this to my call. You can see that everything is working and key is preserved. Now let's try to remove the key from the original object. Okay, now still we are using my call. You can see that the original object remains the same. So this is how call works. So we essentially written we essentially have written the polyfill of the call method. Now using this, we can write our own version of the bind method. Okay, so print user dot bind. Now again, this is a function. Now this function expects the first argument should be the value of this. So I can say this object and args1. So I will explain why this is args1 instead of args. And what does bind does? Bind returns a new function. Okay, so here uh, again, when we use a print user dot bind like this, and we can pass values. So when we invoke bind using print user, so what will be the value of this inside the bind? Now this is the function definition of bind. So inside bind, the value of this in this case will be print user, right? So here, if you use this, the value will be from this function call, it will be print user. Now what about if you use this inside here or this function? This is a new function which we are returning. So you see this is a normal standalone function, and inside if you try to access this, the value of this will be undefined, right? Now if you want to use the same this, which means print user inside, we need to create a new variable. So const self and this. Okay, now here, so this is the context of this outer function, and this is the inner function which we are returning. So inside this outer function, the value of this will be print user because we are calling bind using print user. So we get the value of this and saved it into self. Now inside this function, we can simply use self to access print user, right? Now here we are using the rest operator for args2. So we know that with bind, we don't with bind we have the option to pass all the arguments or some of the arguments of the original function. So that's why whatever arguments the initially pass will be saved into this args1 array, and the returned function expects the rest of the arguments. That's what I used here, args2. Okay. Okay, so args1 array have the um, arguments when the bind function is invoked, and args2 will be the arguments when the returned function is invoked, right? Now inside this function, we essentially have to call print user. Now print user is in this, so but we cannot use this inside this function because inside this function this will be undefined. So we save the value of this into self. So we can just use self here, right? Now what is our requirement? When self is invoked, this object should be the value of this. Now we already have my call, So what we can simply do, self dot my call, and here we can simply pass this object. Now when we pass the argument, we have to pass this and this. Okay, so what we can simply do is we can use the spread operator, args1, args2. Okay, so this is the bind function. So let me rename it to my bind. Okay, so we don't have to mutate the original bind function, so it's my bind. So here it will be my bind. Okay, now let's try to use this. So print user my bind, and let's give Shweta, and this returns a function. So const fn3. Now let's call fn3 using India and 25. Save this. Shweta 25 place India. Now what happens here? So print user dot my bind, and I just passed this object. So this function is invoked. Now it receives only this object. So we didn't pass any values. So this will be an empty array. Now inside this will be the object that we use to call my bind. So in this case, print user will be the value of this. And now it is saved to self. Now a new function is created and it is returned. So inside the new function, it receives other arguments. So the returned function is now saved to fn3. Now we just passed India and 25. So these two values will be saved args2 array. Right? Now self is print user. Right? Now we already added my call to print user so that we can just use my call to self. It is only happening because here we are using print user, because only print user have my call. So self dot my call, and we just passed this object here. Okay, so it uses the passed object as the value of this. We already written the logic here. That's why we use this function logic here. We are using the my call method inside the bind function. Now what is args1? So we didn't pass anything. So this is an empty array. So there is nothing. Args2 is an array having India and 25. So this will be comma separated here. Now it will call print user with the passed this object, in this case Sweta, as the value of this. So let me change this, and here I'm passing USA. Okay. In this case, what happens now? This object is Shweta, and we passed one argument. So args1 will contain USA. Now, inside this, we again passed India and 25. So args2 will be India and 25. So when this self is invoked, which means print user is invoked, the first argument will be USA, and the second argument will be India, and the third argument will be 25. But the function is only expecting two arguments. The first argument should be the place, and the second argument should be the age. But here in this case, you can see that Shweta, age will be India and place will be USA, because we already set the place here. Now this is a function which is expecting only one argument, which is the age. So we can just simply pass 25 here. Now Shweta, age 25, and place is USA. Now we did all these, like we created our own version of the call and our own version of the bind to understand why once we set the value of this using the bind function, we cannot change it. So here we have the answer. Using the bind, we are returning a new function, right? And if you see closely, inside the returned function, we are not using this, right? We are using self, which is the value of this in the lexical environment, right? So inside the returned function, we are not using this. So if we are not using this, then what is the point of using call, right? So here we got fn3. Now let's say fn3 dot call, and here we are passing user and 30 as the age. So what happens here? fn3 is this function, and here we are saying that call fn3 and use this user object as the value of this inside fn3. But if you see fn3, we are not using this inside, so this user object is not used. But inside this fn3, the value of this is actually taken from the lexical environment using the self variable. So it will always be self, right? And it will always be the passed this object to the bind function. So in this case, even if you do fn3.call and just pass user and age like this, you still get Shweta because that is the bound object. So here in my bind, we are passing Shweta. So that's the same thing with call, bind, and apply. So whichever method that we are using on a function where this is not used. That's why once we set the value of this using the bind method, we cannot change it. I hope you understand everything about call, apply, and bind, and everything about explicit binding. So thank you for watching, and keep watch this series. If you haven't watched the previous videos, please watch them first and then come to this video. And thank you all.